Today's episode of The Casual Criminalist is brought to you by AG1 from Athletic Greens. This is a comprehensive, all-in-one green powder that is engineered to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet and support your body's nutritional needs across 4 pillars of health: gut health, immune support, energy, and recovery. It's packed with 75 vitamins and minerals. You can see them all listed on the back here as well, along with the amount per serving, daily value, etc. Very helpful stuff. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more comprehensive powder or supplement on the market. Look, I'm not a health YouTuber. You're not watching a true crime show for health tips. I am not the person to come to for that. But I also know that, I like to keep healthy. I also know that I probably don't eat the most balanced of diets. I could certainly do with eating more vegetables. But what I do know is that AG1 helps me fill any dietary gaps that I have, which are plentiful. What you do is every morning I just take a scoop of it out of this nicely made tin here. This is actually an empty one because you have to keep the other one refrigerated. And I take a scoop out of that. I put it in this the bottle thing. I shake it up and then I drink it along with my coffee. I don't know if it's a placebo effect, but I do kind of feel that it sustains my coffee energy in the morning while also making me feel healthier considering the enormous amount of coffee that I drink. So, if this sounds like the supplement that you've been looking for, grab your own immunity bundle, which also includes this, a year's supply of vitamin D. I take a drop of that on my tongue before I drink this. You also get 5 individual travel packs, because taking this with you when you travel, not super convenient. Pop a few of these bad boys in your luggage and you're good to go. So to get that supply of vitamin D, the 5 free travel packs with your first purchase, go to athleticgreens.com/TCC. Again, athleticgreens.com/TCC. There is a link below. I'm going to drink some of this and then back to today's video. Hello everybody, welcome back to another brand new episode of The Casual Criminalist. As always, I am your host, Simon, and this one has been written by George. It's called Cheung Tze-keung. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that guide. There's no pronunciation guide on the title for this one, so it's a guess until I know better. Thanks, George, for writing it. If you're new here to the format, to the show, welcome. Thank you for being here. It's great to have you. George will write me something. I'm going to read it. I've never read it before. I have actually no idea what this is about because the only title is the guy's name. So this could be a horrible one full of brutal murder, or it could be heists or something more light. We're definitely going to find out, although George has written a couple of savage ones for me lately, so I get the feeling we might have a little bit of murder in store, which, I would say that would be fun, but that doesn't seem appropriate. Let's just crack on with it, shall we? It's the 23rd of May, 1996 in Hong Kong. Inside the recently completed Bank of China Tower, an army of well-heeled white-collar workers toiled away to keep the big arrows on their graphs pointing upwards. The days were long and tiring for this economic ensemble who counted down the seconds as the clock swung around to 6 o'clock. Quitting time. That is a long day. What time do they Wait, I assume these guys are like some stock traders or something, like graphs, or I guess they could be doing anything, but 6 o'clock's a long day. I remember learning, as a kid, you'd be like, I don't know, I studied business as my undergrad. You'd be like, what sort of careers can you do afterwards? You'd be like, oh, banking. And it's like, yeah, they work all the time. And you're like, oh my God. I mean, as a kid, that sounded good. And now I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad I don't do that. It's like, now it's like 6 o'clock rolls around, so I better be at bloody home by 6.
I'm finished.
As soon as the clock struck 6, thousands of men and women up and down the height of the tower let out a deep sigh of relief and began shuffling towards the ground floor. Their days had been long, hard, and tiring, and they just wanted to get home with as few dramatics and inconveniences as possible. None more so than Victor Lee Sarkoy. Victor, I've got a pronunciation guide at the bottom here. Victor Lee Tze-keung. Oh my God, his name is so... Sometimes the spelling on the names is so different to how they're pronounced that it's like I'm definitely going to get that wrong. Like Jew is Kwai. What is that about? It's like, what is that about, Simon? Is just try being a language you don't speak. Who joined the caravan of fatigued financiers after an arduous day's toil. Oh, I got another note. I've got a long-ass note. A clarification for Simon. The reason for translations occasionally being so separated from reality is colonialism. Oh, wait, not translations. Isn't this how do you say it? Like where the name the pronunciation of the name. There are two primarily transliteration, that's the word I'm looking for, transliteration models that you'll see employed for Mandarin. Wade Giles and Pinyin. Wade Giles was developed in the 19th century by two Western men named, shockingly, Wade and Giles. Their approach to transliteration can be summarized as, this funny language is a bit tricky, isn't it? Oh, we're not having any of that mumbo jumbo. That's how I imagine all colonists sound. Because they're like, what shall we do? We'll spread the glory of Britain everywhere. It didn't work so great with time. Consequently, transliterations in this system can end up sounding only vaguely reminiscent of their original form, if not flatly incorrect. For example, Mao Zedong would become Mao Si-tung. Si-chung. Okay. Wade Giles is obsolete, but continues to persist in various ways. Pinyin was developed in the 1950s by, get this, actual Chinese people and everything. What a radical concept. Generally, I opt for Pinyin transliterations of Mandarin in my scripts, except in instances such as a name which is commonly known by its Wade Giles transliteration, and its Pinyin transliteration, while more accurate, is different to the point of being unrecognizable. Cantonese also has a similar dynamic of the old, outdated transliteration system versus the new, actually useful one. But to spare this footnote becoming as long as the main video itself, you might have achieved that already by now, George, we shall save an explanation of Cantonese for another video. And now, back to today's episode. It was actually longer than any of my asides. That's not true. But where most of his colleagues drifted towards Central MTR Station and the managers drifted toward the taxi rank, Victor Lee curved off toward the car park, where he fell into the triple quilted luxury of a Nissan President's rear seat, because he was not just any banker, he was the eldest son of Li Ka-shing, pronounced exactly as you'd say it as an English speaker. Brilliant! That's a lot easier than the other guy whose name sounds so different. Hong Kong's richest man. So I guess in Hong Kong, Nissan make luxury cars. Nissan Japanese? I feel like they're Japanese. But to me, I didn't even know Nissan made luxury cars. Nissan Presidents. Victor Lee Zhe-ju, chauffeur, began driving towards the family mansion in Deepwater Bay Road. Fortunately for Victor Lee, the route was regular and familiar, and he was able to slip into a light sleep as his chauffeur followed his regular route, free from input from him. Unfortunately for Victor Lee, the chauffeur was not the only person who was familiar with his route. Victor Lee's serene sleep was interrupted when the car in front suddenly slammed on its brakes and forced the chauffeur to execute an emergency stop, and he awakened with a violent jolt. Anger jointly erupted from both driver and passenger toward the idiot driver in front, but was quickly replaced by fear as the car behind them leapt out into the other lane and screeched to a halt beside them, and the car behind that quickly closed the gap and pulled in behind them, boxing them in from all sides. Balaclava-shrouded men carrying AK-47s piled from three cars and stormed towards Victor Lee's Nissan President. Oh my god, that's got to be so terrifying. It's like, yep. And now the hostage situation. This is the problem about, like, you're always like, yeah, being rich must be awesome. Like, look at all this great stuff. You've got a Nissan.
What a piece of shit.
No, okay, I know it's fancy. You got like a fancy Nissan. You're cruising in the back. You've got a chauffeur. You're going over to your mansion. And it's like, yeah, life seems good. And then it's like, yeah, but you're also a highly... Like, especially as the kid. It's like, because you're the kid of the youngest man. They're going to kidnap you and get a lot of money from old pops. Maybe get their own Nissan. One of them furiously began pulling at Victor Lee's door handle. He tried it half a dozen times in quick succession before giving up, and then he reported back to the gang leader that it was locked. The leader then calmly marched around to the front of the car, raised his AK-47 to the driver, and barked a simple command to him. "Open it! Now!" The driver hesitated, petrified with fear, and the assailant, growing impatient and irate, quickly swung his rifle over to the unoccupied passenger seat and put a single round through the windscreen. The driver's ears rung in deafening pain, but he just managed to make out a follow-up command that screamed at him, "I said now, hurry up." I'm kind of surprised, like, son of the richest man in Hong Kong doesn't have an armored limo. Like, he doesn't... I feel like... I don't know, do rich people have... Or is that just like... No, rich people have armored cars, don't they? Like, really, like, mega rich, like, richest people in the country. Like, Bill Gates isn't driving around in a regular-ass car, is he? He's got, like, an armored car. Or doesn't he? I don't actually know. And Bill Gates' kids, do they? Or do they just want to live normal-ass lives? But then you could be kidnapped because you're Bill Gates' son. Or daughter. That's good. That's intense. I said now, hurry up. He fumbled around at the controls and eventually hit the door unlock button. The gang descended on the car like vultures on a fresh carcass and bundled Victor Lee into the boot of the car that had previously swung alongside them. The rest of the gang then piled into the passenger seats, and the leader paused to apologize the driver for frightening him and asked if he wouldn't mind giving it an hour before he reported the kidnapping. What are you up to? It's like, Joe, may as well ask. If you don't ask, you never know. Then they took off down the road, making sure to slow down and blend in with the traffic when they were out of visual range of all witnesses. Victor Lee remained in the boot, desperately trying to maneuver his body around the tight confines that he found himself in. He began fumbling in the darkness around the edge of the boot, desperate to find some kind of release lever or any way of escape, but he had no luck. The stress and anxiety that consumed every cell and fiber of his being only continued to crescendo. Did they plan on killing him? Was this revenge for someone that his dad had wronged? Endless possibilities and betrayals played in Victor's mind, none of which had a happy ending. In this situation, you've got to assume, if they wanted to kill you, you'd be dead already. They wouldn't bother kidnapping you and getting you in their car and all this stuff. They'd have just killed you because why faff around with all this stuff? It's kidnapping and it's for money. Surely. That's the only explanation. But also, are you going to be rational state of mind in the boot of the car? And also, my dude, they're going to have checked, they're going to have put one of their crony dudes in the boot of the car and be like, yo, Jeff, can you get out of this boot? Is there any lever or anything in there? They'd have checked it really thoroughly. The one way I've heard that you should escape, and I don't know where I heard this from, or probably just saw it in a movie, but you take out the jack, because there's probably going to be a jack somewhere in there for, if it breaks down, you put the spare tire on. You get that jack out, and then you put it on the ground, and then you gradually winch up the jack into the top of the boot. And at some point, that jack's going to just pop the boot open and break the lock. Because it's a jack, it can lift up a car, it sure can pop off the boot. So there you go. Just saved your life, didn't I? His pontificating was eventually dispelled when he felt the car take a sharp turn. The ride became suddenly much bumpier, and he felt them moving much more slowly. He assumed because they'd come off-road. He turned his mental attention instead to processing these new events, but before he could reach any conclusions, the car slid to a halt. He heard the 4 doors of the car open, shut, muffled chattering, and footsteps scurrying all around him. Then the sound of a heavy diesel engine that crawled closer and closer towards him. Oh my god. At that point, I'd be like, are we at a junkyard? Are you just going to crush this car with me inside it? That would be terrifying. Suddenly, the darkness that filled his vision was interrupted by a blinding light as the boot of the car was flung open, and he was hooked up from the car and bundled into the back of a cargo van. At that point, I'd be like, oh, okay, good. We're not being crushed inside a car, because oh my god, that would be a horrible way to go. 2 of the men climbed in with him, pulled the door shut and gagged him blindfold and bound his arms behind his back with rope. He was given some bizarrely reassuring words. Listen, rich boy, we just want your daddy's money, yeah? To be a good little boy and play ball, and we'll make sure you get back to daddy with all your limbs still attached. Right? Please note that the quotes in today's episode are generally far heavier laced with blue language than I have depicted. But for the sake of mine and Simon's delicious sweet monetization, I've omitted them. Thank you, George. That's very considerate. I just made an episode. I was recording another episode of another show I do called Decoding the Unknown. It's another podcast. You can check it out. And the literal first word in that script was Nazi. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm doing this one for free. With that, the kidnappers burnt their getaway car and disappeared into the new territories. The next day, May the 24th, the lead kidnapper woke up bright and early just before the break of dawn. He enjoyed a hearty breakfast of iron Buddha tea and several cigarettes and set out to seize his day. First item on his to-do list was the important business of meeting at a particular mansion in Deepwater Bay. He grabbed everything he needed to make a compelling sales pitch, a Soviet TT-33 pistol and several pounds of explosives jerry-rigged to his chest in a crude homemade bomb vest. Whoa.
Take it easy, man.
Just got taken up a degree. Kidnapping, and now we're on to suicide bombing? He promptly arrived and was warmly welcomed inside the Lee family mansion. He was asked if he would like some tea, but declined and was shown to Lee Ka-shing's office. He got straight to business. He showed him a Polaroid photo of Victor Lee tied up next to a copy of today's newspaper, opened up his jacket to reveal the bomb vest, and said, if you want to live with your complete family again, I need $1 billion cash and no funny business, or I pull the cord. This guy doesn't have a good understanding of finance.
Sorry.
Is he talking Hong Kong dollars? Because that's about 10 times less. That's $100 million US. But if he's talking about $100 million, $1 billion US, or 10 billion Hong Kong dollars, does he really think the rich people just have $1 billion in cash? Rich people don't have that much money. It's like, I mean, they obviously have a ton of money, but it's in assets. No one's just keeping $1 billion in cash. It's either in shares of their company or in other assets that are less liquid than cash. What's going on? I guess, theoretically, a very wealthy person could have $100 million in cash, but I'd still be surprised. Surprisingly, Li Ka-shing made no attempts to negotiate and immediately and calmly agreed to his terms. If you're finding it odd, dear viewers, how calm Li Ka-shing was between the kidnapping, the losing of $1 billion and the pistol in his face, you're not the only one. The kidnapper himself found the serenity of the situation odd and asked Ka-shing how he could remain so calm in such a stressful situation. He responded, "Because it's my fault this time. I have such a high reputation in Hong Kong, but I have no precautions at all. For example, if I go to the beach early in the morning, I will drive my car to the new territories at 5 a.m. in the morning. Basically, a few cars can surround me on the roads, and I have no precautions at all. I really need to be more careful, and you have made me aware." I'll be like, at this point, I'd rather him be terrified, because this like cool calculating shit has got that like Walter White vibe, where it's just like, he knows. I'm gonna die. This is not gonna end well for me. I've been outsmarted, and I don't even know how. Despite his willingness to comply, Li Ka-shing did not have $1 billion simply lying around his mansion, so he offered the kidnapper $40 million in petty cash that he was able to assemble since learning of his son's kidnapping and the presumed ransom that was coming. The kidnapper made a counteroffer. He was nothing if not a superstitious man, owing to the number 4 being unlucky in Chinese culture. He offered Li Ka-shing a discount of $2 million on the deposit, which he accepted, which brought the total ransom up to 1.038 billion Hong Kong dollars, which is 135 million US dollars. Oh, okay. I understand. So he wanted the 40... Okay, so we're talking Hong Kong dollars here. So 135 million USD. And we're talking that the 40 million that he has in petty cash is just going to be taken as a deposit, but he's actually going to take 38 million. So he still wants his billion. He's just like, yeah, I'll take this cash because that's what you have now. Dude. Li Ka-shing also asked for a day to arrange the ransom, to which the kidnapper agreed, and the two parted cordially, as could be in the circumstances. The next day, Li Ka-shing received a call from the kidnapper. He instantly recognized his familiar voice, and he had instructions for him. "You've got my money. Good. At some point today, we will come to your mansion in a blue Toyota Corolla. One person comes outside to make the exchange. You or anyone else, I don't care. If I see 2 or more people, the deal is off and we leave. If I see any police, we kill your son and as many of your family as we can before the police take us down." Got it? And that is exactly what had happened. True to their word, the kidnapper and his gang arrived at the mansion, and in a surprisingly cordial exchange, $1.038 billion is counted. Victor Li was released from the car, and the gang sped away. 135. I mean, $1 billion is absurd. It's kind of like Dr. Evil insane. But like, still, $135 million in cash? Does that even fit in a car? $1 million fits in a shopping bag, which is kind of crazy and surprising. I don't know what the largest note in Hong Kong is. Hold on. Whoa, they have a $1,000 note. Oh wait, but that's only $100 or something. So let's assume it's roughly the same size. The money's going to be about, the value-wise, is going to be about the same volume as Hong Kong. So that's 135 shopping bags full of money. Does that fit in a blue Toyota Corolla? It's kind of intense. Days turned into weeks in the Li household, and the family began to move on and get back to their normal lives. Li Ka-shing was happy to simply have his son return unharmed. Money be damned. The stress and anxiety that permeated the air and conversation during these agonizingly stressful few days was replaced by serenity and calmness. The peace was shattered, however, when several weeks later a call was forwarded to his office, and a hauntingly familiar voice sat on the other end of the line. It was the kidnapper. Ka-shing instantly turned pale as a bedsheet as dread consumed him. His heart began smashing against his ribcage 200 times a minute as he ran hypothetical situations through his head, none of which predicted a happy ending to this phone call. Wait, how? They don't have anyone. And surely he's like increased his security since having to pay out $1 billion. Had another family member been taken? Surely not. He had upped all their security with what he thought was a blank check. There we go. But why else would he be calling? Nervously, he summoned the breath from his lungs to ask the kidnapper what he wanted now, terrified of the answer he would receive. "Why are you calling?" Li Ka-shing asks. "Mr. Li, can you teach me how to invest my ransom money?" No, dude. You can't be f***ing serious. That is... I tell you, I don't even have words. What are you doing? Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, now let's all take a moment to pause and fully appreciate what we just heard. This man had secured $1 billion ransom from Li Ka-shing and now called him up to politely ask for tips on how to invest it. Li Ka-shing responded much more politely than I would have done in this situation. It has to be said, telling the kidnapper, "I'm afraid I do not have an answer. I could teach you to be a good man if you asked other things, but you do not. You have only one path. Fly far and high, or else your ending will be a sad one." There's a note. In this business, we call this foreshadowing. Oh my god, this guy is Walter White.
You're goddamn right.
He's gonna like set those watches. And I just get, this is some like rich people, like supervillain shit, right? He's just gonna come back and end this guy's world. At least I hope. I mean, I don't know. He just kidnapped and he didn't murder anyone. But I just get the feeling this is going to be like some, what's that movie? Taken. I have a very special set of skills. And in this case, Li Ka-shing's like, I have an extraordinary amount of money. You're going to pay. But just who was the kidnapper? I hear you all screaming. His name was, pronunciation guideline, Cheung Tze-keung, a man who ransomed the children of business moguls for billions of dollars, a man who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from armored vans, a man who to some was a working class hero and a model Robin Hood, and to others was a terror of the 1990s, a man who to others is simply the epitome of pre-handover Hong Kong celebrity gangster. If you thought Yip Kai-foon's story was crazy, ladies and gents in the audience, buckle up, because you ain't seen nothing yet. Yes, Yip Kai-foon, I believe, has gone out by the time I'm recording this. We're quite far ahead, recorded on Casual Criminalist. That was a previous episode that George wrote for me. Early life. Born on the 7th of April 1955, Cheung Tze-keung was born to, let's just call him Cheung from now on, because, oh my... was born to a farming family in the mountainous area of Shaoxing. There's no pronunciation guide. What am I supposed to do, George? Guangxi province on the Chinese mainland. His family were dirt poor during his infant years, and his sister died of starvation during the Great Leap Forward. His father... The Great Leap Forward. The most ironically named thing ever. His father eventually smuggled his family into Hong Kong to try and find a better life for themselves. They settled in Causeway Bay, and Cheung attended primary school in Hong Kong between the ages of 6 and 11. He was a bright and hard-working high achiever in school, but was constantly bullied and harassed for being newly arrived as an immigrant from the mainland. Eventually, he learned that might was right and overcame his bullying by punching his way to the leadership of the toughest gang in school. His father was a poor and humble man by birth and had little formal education and even less money to support his family's new life in Hong Kong after their arrival. Fortunately, however, he did so happen to have quite the knowledge of and interest in traditional Chinese medicine, so after working as a laborer, living modestly and saving what money he could, he made the undeniably pragmatic choice to open a medicinal herb store on Temple Street, Yau Ma Tei. He also ran an illegal ziffer lottery to help supplement his family income. I could make a joke about gambling and Chinese medicine here, couldn't I? Could be like, well, if you're a crook, both of these things totally fit for you. Life began to improve for Cheung after opening their medicinal herb store and lottery racket. They were by no means rich, but through hard work and labor, they had escaped the worst depths of crushing poverty. Did they, though? Didn't his sister die in the Great Leap Forward? That sounds like the worst depths of poverty. Or was that his... I don't remember who that was. Doesn't matter. Let's carry on. They had earned enough money to enjoy life from time to time, and Cheung eventually dropped out of school at the age of 11 to help his father run the family business. Oh, I see the problem with using his... I've been shortening it, but I've clearly confused the father and the son, haven't I? Because I'm shortening the name because it's hard. He received the remainder of his education on the streets of Yau Ma Tei. Here, he was exposed to all kinds of vices and corrupting influences. He was first arrested at the age of 12 for pickpocketing, and by the age of 16, he was already a 14K triad member. I don't know what that is. It must be some sort of gangster rank. Between the ages of 12 and 20, he was arrested over 15 times for assault, theft, robbery, conspiracy to commit robbery, and a plethora of other minor offenses. Robbery, assault, minor. Okay, I guess assault can be minor. You can punch someone in the face and say that's a fairly minor crime. But robbery? Robbery's not theft. Robbery's like, I can't remember what it's with, but it's like with a malice or aggression or something, right? Cheung Tze-keung's parents had not abandoned hope for their young son to go on the straight and narrow, however, and they arranged for him to be taken on as a tailor's apprentice by a family friend in Yau Ma Tei. Surprisingly, the tailor who took him under his wing spoke very highly of him in later interviews, claiming Tze-keung took to the work like a bird to flight and was nothing but a hardworking, diligent, and enterprising employee. This was no temporary vocation for Cheung Tze-keung either. He began to see his pockets fill up with money, and he liked what he saw. Seeing a more comprehensive market in serving Hong Kong's wealthy expatriate community, he took time to learn English, attended 2 adult language learning courses at a local high school, and began to save money. Eventually, he had 5,000 Hong Kong dollars that he'd saved up, and he opened a store in Mid-Level, a wealthy district of Hong Kong Island inhabited by wealthy foreigners and the local elite. Life continued its solid upward trajectory for Cheung Tze-keung, who by now had completely abandoned his petty criminality. His 50,000 Hong Kong dollar investment quickly became 100,000 Hong Kong dollars cash in his pocket, and he met and married the love of his life, Loi Yifeng. But being the wrinkly brains that you are, dear viewers, you've no doubt deducted by now that this honest streak did not last forever. Yeah, you're watching a true crime show. Something's gonna change. This channel is not called The Casual Couturier, and you do not click on a video about Hong Kong's finest tailor. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Cheung Tze-keung to surrender to the seductions of his old habits when he found his climbing of the economic ladder to be a bit too slow for his liking. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm doing well. I wish I was just doing better. It's like, yeah, he's having a successful business, but he's just like, man, it's just not fast enough. Come on, we got to get some crime on the case. One day in late 1989, Wan Fanchi, an old friend of Cheung Tze-keung's criminal past who had never abandoned criminality, just happened to visit his store to check in on his old pal. Drinks and pleasantries were shared aplenty in the pair's reunion, but one anecdote in particular stuck in Tze-keung's mind. If you want to become prosperous, you have got to go the wrong way and have a careful plan. We are just like tailors. We need to be seamless, but unlike tailors, our rewards are vast and considerable. Yes, but also, they're vast and considerable, but also potentially prison. With that phrase, a seed was planted in his mind, a seed that would be watered and nurtured by Cheung Tze-keung and Lo Yangfeng's own materialistic desires, and it didn't take long for that seed to blossom into a verdant flower of armored van robbery. Armored van robberies. Cheung Tze-keung's first armored van robbery occurred at 12:30 p.m. on the 22nd of February 1990. The police received a distress call from a security company pleading for help. One of their armored vans left the cargo terminal at Kai Tak International Airport at 11:30 a.m. and was supposed to call every half an hour to report that all was well. They'd spent the last half hour trying to get information. They called the car phone in the armored van, the personal phones of the crew, and they even called the family members of the crew to try and get any information. And finally, fearing the van had been robbed, they decided to get the police involved. If I'm like running an armored van company and it's like, all right guys, call in every half an hour to check in, and I didn't get that call, and then I phoned their van, and then I phoned one of their mobile phones, I'd be like, yep.
We are
It's like, you know what's going on. You know they've been robbed. Call the police then. Don't be like, yeah, shall we phone Peter's family? Just, maybe he had something going on that day. Even though we got a call from him half an hour ago saying he was in the van. What were you possibly thinking, security company? Their fears were confirmed at 13:30 when the police received a call from a clearly distressed and exhausted security guard. They explained how shortly after leaving Kai Tak Airport, the car in front of them slammed on its brakes and 5 large balaclava-clad men, all with pistols, piled out of the car and began screaming at them. They barked at the driver to unlock the doors of the van, then put his hands up in the air well away from the steering wheel. The driver and passenger were pulled from the armored van and bundled into the back. Cheung Tze-keung, I'm just going to call him Cheung again because his dad's out of the picture and we're not going to get confused. It's the main dude from today's episode, Cheung. Cheung and one of his associates then firebombed their original car, took the guard's place in command of the armored van, and the other 3 robbers jumped in the bag to gag, blindfold, and bind the security guards. Isn't the point of an armored van that it's armored? Like, if you're driving an armored van and anyone can just get in with a pistol, what's the point of it being an armored van? You may as well just have a regular van. Aren't you supposed to be like, no, I'm not getting out. It's an armored van.
I got scared.
You can shoot it, but it's not going to come through. And I know, obviously, armor doesn't last forever and you can have armor-piercing rounds and whatnot, but surely this sort of basic robbery is exactly what these vans are for preventing, right? They drove to a temporary housing estate, now Mega Box Mall in Kowloon Bay, just a few hundred yards from the Kai-Tak cargo terminal. They moved the van's prize, 40 boxes of Rolex watches, into another truck that they had stored waiting. Finally, they firebombed the armored truck, sat the bound guards in a comfortable position on the ground, and disappeared. Today's haul for the robbery: Rolex watches worth 30 million Hong Kong dollars or $4 million US. Oh my god. I would say that's a lot of Rolex watches, and it is. But with the prices of watches today, it's probably not even that many. Personally, I'd be quite happy with a 30 million Hong Kong dollar payday myself, but this was not the case for Cheung. He was annoyed that he had simply let himself get distracted by procuring big-ticket items with no regard to how they'd be actually fenced or liquidated. Fencing goods of any type and value is a risk, as Tze-keung's associate and old friend of the channel, Yip Kai-foon, would have happily attested to. Oh, these two dudes know each other, or his friend knows the... there you go. He found that he struggled to sell the watches for their retail value. People expected a discount for handling stolen Rolexes. Consequently, he vowed only to rob cash in the future. Probably smart. The second and final armored van robbery Cheung and his crew would carry out occurred on the 13th of July 1991. Following a similar pattern as before, Republic National Bank truck carrying banknotes from Taiwan leaves Kai-Tak International Airport cargo depot at 8:15 a.m. As soon as it was out of sight of the cargo depot, it was pounced on and had its route blocked by a car. 3 armed masked men poured out of the car and, using pistols, encouraged the drivers to disembark and comply. How do you know what's in these armored vans, though? Like, if you're robbing an armored van, it could be Rolexes, it could be cash.
It could be an imperial code.
It could also be just really important documents that have no, value to thieves. It's weird, right? The truck was far more heavily guarded this time, with 4 guards who carried a total of 2 shotguns between them on board. This heavier security was to no avail, however, as all the guards made the quite pragmatic choice that their life was worth considerably more than some bankers' profits, and complied fully. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I told this story before, but when I worked as a supermarket as a kid, they were like, yo, if someone comes in and wants to rob the place, do not press the alarm, comply, give them the money. We don't want you to be killed. And I'm like, you really think I was going to press that alarm? I'm giving that money straight to them. If you were like, be a hero, just say no, shut the till, and press that alarm button, I'd be like, I'm not doing that. I mean, I wouldn't say that because I'd still want the job, but I just know if we were robbed, I'd be like, F that shit, guys. They can have all the money. And they'd be like, you're a coward. I'd be like, well, it's not my money, is it? Even if it was my money, I'd be like, take it. Not because I'm a coward, just I like living.
Like a real hero.
They then firebombed the first car again and drove to the newly completed building site of Tate's Khan Tunnel, where they transferred their loot and the 2 shotguns, which they decided to keep, into a truck that was left waiting. Keeping those shotguns is a mistake, because they got numbers and records, and if they find those 2 shotguns, they'll be like, those are the 2 shotguns from a robbery. If they find the cash, they might be like, no, it's just cash. It's just cash, we weren't tracking it. But those 2 shotguns, they know it was you. You're going to get in big trouble. Get rid of the shotguns. You've already stolen loads of money. Buy some shotguns. They then firebombed the armored truck and left the guards in a comfortable position to be found or wiggle free on their own accord. Total haul for this robbery, 170 million Hong Kong dollars, $22 million USD in cash, and 2 Remington Model 870 shotguns. You got $22 million in cash. American. You can buy as many Remington Model 870 shotguns as you want. It doesn't matter how expensive they are. There's probably not that many in the world. This winning streak would not last forever, however. Cheung had made mistakes, large glaring mistakes that would soon lead the police straight to him and see him thrown before a judge before he could commit another robbery. But how? I hear you scream in the audience. His plan sounded watertight, did it not? He changed vehicle multiple times, destroyed evidence. What went wrong? Loads of stuff. This isn't like some genius supervillain car robbery. He could have been caught on camera. They could have seen the license plate on the car that he pulled up in. Maybe that was stolen. Maybe they can trace it to a theft earlier, which was caught on camera. There's tons of ways they could get caught. Indeed, Cheung was extremely meticulous in making sure that he did not leave any evidence behind, even going so far as to have his crew superglue their fingers to avoid leaving prints. Smart. But it was not meticulous enough, because when the wrinkled brains at the Hong Kong Police Force CID began examining what evidence they did have, they uncovered a paper trail that pointed squarely at Tze-keung. Firstly, both robberies were connected by having almost identical modus operandi. That's circumstantial though. Then detective noticed that both robberies hit the highest value cargo moved on their respective days, leading them to believe that an insider was involved. Okay, so that's how they find out what's in the vans. As what were the odds of 2 random robberies just happening to hit the most valuable vans each time? With that in mind, they created a very large proverbial Venn diagram and saw who, if anyone, happened to land in the middle. They discovered only a single person of interest, Lo Yang Feng, Feng, who you might remember as Cheung's wife. Uh-oh. Guys, this is like far from a watertight plan. Your wife, who works at the airport, is telling you which security vans to rob. How do you not know this is going to go wrong? Not only was Lu Yangfang employed by both companies when they were robbed, she was employed in the same role as a data input officer. In both companies, she had full knowledge of the timings and routes of every armored van. She could see what goods they carried. She could see the amount the security guards posted to each van and the amount of firearms being carried. Needless to say, the police found this somewhat suspicious. Yeah, it's mad suspicious. You don't have to be a wrinkled brain to know that one. The police knew she couldn't be directly involved in the robberies, as the security guards interviewed all unanimously agreed that only men robbed them, and what's more, she had a watertight alibi, being at work during both robberies. Suspicion then naturally moved to her close male friends and family. The police began running background checks for Cheung, among others, and found that his tailors had been robbed 18 times in the few years it had been open. Either Cheung had biblically bad luck, or he was as bent as a 9-bob note. Having a correct hunch that Cheung could be their man, they arrested him and brought him in for a lineup in front of security guards. Luckily for him, however, no one fingered him and he was released on a 10,000 Hong Kong dollar, $1,200 bail. Unluckily for Cheung, the following day, one of the guards returned to the police station. He claimed, in fact, that he did recognize the man and gestured towards a photo of him. He claimed that he hadn't recognized him at the time, as the lineup brought back all of the traumatic memories of the robbery, and he was completely mentally distracted, but as he left the station, he thought about it for the rest of the day, and he was completely 100% sure that it was him. Cheung was immediately rearrested and charged with the robberies. Following a short trial on the 12th of September 1991, he was found guilty of armed robbery. He's going to get a long sentence. These are fairly serious crimes and amounts of money. 20 years, maybe? He was sentenced to 18 years. Not bad. Not a bad guess. In this channel's familiar stomping grounds of Stanley Maximum Security Prison. Yes, was it in the Yip Kai Foon episode where the guy was escaping from there? The loot from these robberies was also never recovered, so if our Hong Kong viewers happen to ever see a tall white man hanging around villages in new territories with a metal detector and a shovel, don't mind me. I've suddenly developed a passion for archaeology. What metal are you going to detect? It's all just paper. Although you go down and you find 40 boxes of Rolexes, you'd be like, God damn. Can't do much with these because they're stolen, but I'm going to have a nice watch forever. Acquittal. I imagine you're thinking now, dear viewers, that it was a pretty open and shut case. Cheung had been positively ID'd by one of the security guards, and there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence to support the claim. But no, through some legal trickery. Wait, wasn't he convicted? Found guilty of armed robbery. Okay. Through some legal trickery, clever manipulation of the facts, and a healthy application of expensive lawyers, which he could now afford for absolutely no reason at all. Cheung would eventually see the verdict overturned and return to the streets a free and technically innocent man. Technically innocent. Definitely. Technically. Cast your mind back a minute or so, dear viewers, to the testimony of the security guard who ID'd Cheung. Remember how he had returned the following day to ID him? That is exactly what Cheung's lawyers exploited to build their case to argue an unfair conviction. He kept attempting to appeal his sentence again and again, and time after time he was met with rejection and denial. The judiciary's quite reasonable logic was that if the testimony of the guard was a bit shaky, the amount of circumstantial evidence that was quite clearly pointing in his direction was more than enough to hold it together. No, but if you throw out the eyewitness, then you just have circumstantial evidence, which is... I'm not sure that's enough. Eventually, the stars aligned for him. His case was heard by a forgiving judge who was in a good mood, and his case was formally repealed, and after 3.5 years in prison, he was released on June the 22nd, 1995. Kidnappings. Cheung was a free man. Once again. And while he had no intention of returning to life on the straight and narrow, he had no intention of returning to the apparently meager paydays that his career in armored van robbery previously yielded into his bank account. Didn't he make $22 million in one robbery? Dude, you got high expectations, mate. I mean, clearly he does, because he managed to kidnap someone for $125 million successfully. So obviously he's got high intentions. I mean, $160 million for a day's work. Chump change. Whoever could be satisfied with that tiny sum of money. George and I, same page. Certainly not Cheung, that's for sure, who had spent his 3.5 years in prison, dreaming of bigger, better, and more profitable criminal enterprises than humble armored van robbery. The what was easy for him. Hong Kong was the richest city on earth, full of billionaires. Just kidnap them and their children. Easy. Got a note here. been a while since we had a note. When listening to Cheung's statements and comments on the matter himself, this discussion is actually where you see a hell of a lot of his anti-rich, pro-proletarian ideology come through. Except this is the irony with these things, right? It's like, yo, you're like an anti-rich, go-proletariat kind of dude. And it's like, yeah, but you're super unhappy with $22 million. How are you anti-rich? You just want to be rich yourself and are jealous of all the people who are rich. No? He rarely talks about billionaires of Hong Kong paying their ransom because they love their family. Oh no, that was a regular human emotion, and individuals with the cutthroat instincts to make it to such levels of wealth anything but human in his eyes. Instead, he discusses how they would pay up because they were important to the business, with many of Hong Kong's billionaires promoting their family members to senior and critical positions in the business. Having brushed shoulders with the odd billionaire from time to time, I'll be the first to admit that the ultra-wealthy's connections to reality can be a bit shaky at times, but I feel that Cheung was taking it to a very extreme and dark place here. Yeah, agreed. Of course, people who are super rich like that, their connection to reality. It's not like their connection to reality is wrong. It's just they have a different connection to the world than the rest of us non-billionaires, because their life is completely different. The how was what really consumed Cheung's time in prison. Which people to kidnap, how to kidnap them, what tools would you need, who could he depend on for his crew, would security be heavy, etc. I won't bore you all with the day-to-day account of his musings from inside the prison, but just know that by the time he was finally released in June 1995, he was very well prepared. Another note. Fun extra little tidbit for you. Remember Yip Kai-foon's two mates who fled when he got shot? Dude, George, you overestimate how much I remember. I've read a lot of crime since then. One of those was Cheung Tze-keung, who was working with Kai-foon to smuggle equipment into Hong Kong for his own kidnapping operation. All of these criminals, they're all just tied together. They're all involved doing their little criminal stuff.
Friends forever. Best friends forever.
We are already very familiar with Cheung's first kidnapping, where on the 23rd of May 1996, Victor Lee was kidnapped and ransomed for 1.038 billion Hong Kong dollars. I got another note, which, depending on your source, could still be history's biggest ever ransom. It is an extraordinary amount of money, and it actually worked, which is kind of scary. And after this, the Cheung family were living a life more reminiscent of that of the Qing emperor. They lived in an enormous 3,000 square foot apartment in Ho Man Tin. Another note, shockingly, this is actually huge for Hong Kong. I'm like, yeah, I mean, a 3,000 square foot is a huge apartment, but it's what, like 300 and something square meters? So it's a big house, let alone apartment. But like, considering that this guy has 125 mil, that's not actually that large. Decorated with life-size Buddha statues made from real gold, Sphinx statues carved in the likeness of Lu Yangfang, champagne fountains in the kitchen, and enough marble to restore the Colosseum. George adds, and here's me being impressed when my Hong Kong friends doesn't have to shit where they shower. Yeah, Hong Kong's like famously tiny apartments and stuff because there's lots of people and no space, right? Cheung drove around the streets of Hong Kong in a bright yellow Lamborghini Diablo Roadster. A Hong Kong celebrity in his own right now, he partied with Jackie Chan and many other famous faces. His family traveled the world, touring Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. They stayed at the most expensive hotels and handed out $10,000 tips to street painters as they went. And another note, because half this page is literally notes. It's also speculated during this time that Cheung began an anti-government terrorist operation. I mean, you've got to spend your money somewhere. As not saying you don't start terrorist organizations if you're rich. As his coming into fame and fortune just happens to coincide with a serious rise in petrol bomb attacks at Stanley Prison and trucks and heavy goods vehicles committing hit and runs on police booths and checkpoints, and this fad just happened to fade after his eventual arrest. Also, how are you living such a high-profile life? Like, unless you're like Pablo Escobar and I just imagine, and you've got like government officials in your pocket and stuff, which I don't imagine is so prevalent in Hong Kong as it is in like Colombia. How are you living this life? Someone's going to be like, yo, where did all that money come from? And why isn't the guy... Where's the criminal investigation? What's going on? How does this guy successfully get away with this and then live some sort of mega turbo lifestyle? I don't get it. So, what could possibly drive Cheung to put all of this on the line and risk another kidnapping when he was already over $1 billion in profit? Well, don't forget, Cheung had absolutely got away with this scot-free. Li Ka-shing had never called the police and never would. The answer? It's gambling. Oh, is he going to gamble it all away? That's so sad. Gambling's f***ing horrible. Cheung was an obsessive and compulsive gambler. The casino Lisboa in Macau was as much a home to him as his family's apartment in Ho Man Tin. At its worst, he managed to lose 20 million Hong Kong dollars in a single sitting. After a while, his fortune was quite simply nearly spent, and he had to get more money. So inevitably, with his old trade as a tailor being unable to keep him up to a standard of which he'd now become accustomed, he blew the dust off his old plans and went plotting more kidnappings. The next target was Sun Huan Kai Properties Chairman Gao Bin Jiang. Oh my god. Okay. Oh, okay. I did okay with the pronunciation. Not bad. I mean, probably terrible, but it sort of looks like what George wrote for me. Who was kidnapped by Cheung and his gang on September the 29th, 1997. This kidnapping largely followed the same pattern as Victor Li's kidnapping, with a few differences in execution and difficulties as a result. If I was a super rich Hong Kong dude, and my mate, who's another super rich Hong Kong dude, had his son kidnapped and then ransomed for like $100 million US, I'll be like, guess who else is getting better security for his family? This time, they had kidnapped the billionaire proper rather than one of his children. This surprisingly gave them significantly less leverage than kidnapping an heir. It was conceivable that Victor Li could have become more trouble than he was worth, and the gang would simply have killed him and sought another opportunity. They couldn't kill Guo Bingxiang, as any prospect of ever being paid would go with him, and Bingxiang knew this. Furthermore, Guo Bingxiang was significantly less compliant than Victor Li and his father had been. They initially demanded a $2 billion ransom. And he flatly refused this, his only counter-proposal being that they release him immediately and that he'd think no more of it. Oh my god. That is so intense. It's like, yes, you absolutely have two options. You can ransom me and attempt to get 2 billion Hong Kong dollars out of me, or you can release me and I won't destroy your life. I won't come after you and your family and make them pay.
This is some supervillain shit and I love it.
Cheung's response to these issues was torture. Guo Bingxiang was placed inside a 4x1 foot crate and left curled up for days. He was never let out of the box until he became more agreeable, and he was left in the small crate to eat, sleep, drink, and defecate. On October the 3rd, after 6 days inside the box, he gave in and negotiations began. They agreed on a $600 million, $80 million US ransom, and after making the call to his family to organize the money, he was released from the box. It's important, viewers, that we remember the toll that this torture took on Cheng. The poor man suffered greatly during this ordeal, and he found himself emotionally scarred, being all but a shut-in in the immediate wake of the kidnapping. He was diagnosed with PTSD and depression, and it took over a year of daily intensive psychological treatment and counseling for him to be able to return to something resembling his normal self. Still to this day, he suffers from occasional night terrors and claustrophobia. Downfall and arrest. Cheung's downfall came as quick as his rise. One moment he was the darling of the Hong Kong underworld, a celebrity gangster had totally gotten away with it. He had cars, money, and the next minute he was being tied against a post in Guangdong to face a firing squad. Oh shit, they're firing squad in Hong Kong? Oh my. Like the cliched downfall arc of any good mobster movie, Cheung's fall came because he got too greedy and he got too complacent. He made sloppy mistakes and assumed that just because he had been able to manipulate a legal system once, he'd be able to do it again. His downfall came when he began planning his third kidnapping. Now this was to be a big one, bigger than any of the two that he'd carried out before and more expensive to boot. For this he penned a very specific shopping list. AK-type rifles, 4,000 rounds of 7.62 by 39mm ammunition, 2,000 detonators, 700 meters of fuses, crates of tear gas and explosive grenades, and the piece de resistance, 1,000 kilograms of explosives. The context at home, dear audience, this is roughly the same explosive yield as a V2 rocket. Holy shit, is he planning on taking down the government? And how is someone buying all of this stuff and not getting on some f***ing watch list? With all this money, he's a high-profile guy. What's happening? Shockingly, he managed to find the bulk of this shopping list seemingly rather easily. On January the 8th, 1998, his first shipment arrives in the Saiwan docks from a country I shan't mention because their immigration department is already crabby with me enough as it is. But here's a clue. It's not China or Russia. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. There's a note for me here. And George has just left a private one for me telling me which country it was, and it wasn't the country I thought.
It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma!
In this initial shipment was 800 kilograms of explosives, several crates of bullets, and a healthy sprinkling of AK-type rifles. This cash is immediately loaded onto trucks, snuck past the dock security, and hidden in an old village house in Ma So Lung. Oh my god, pronunciation. It's hidden in some place in Hong Kong or China, maybe. Who knows? They're hiding their stuff. Reports are mixed on what Cheung actually planned to do with such a healthy cache of weapons. Some of his associates interviewed after his downfall say he eventually planned an assault on Stanley Prison to rescue his comrades, including our favorite gold robber Yip Kai Foon. Others state that he was planning some kind of campaign against Tung Chee-hwa, the chief executive of Hong Kong. Whether this campaign would have been a typical kidnapping or drifted into the realm of terrorism, we can only speculate. Whatever his intentions with this healthy injection of armaments into his organization, Cheung needed to get his crew back together, so he crossed the border to the Chinese mainland to gather his followers. His first stop was Guangzhou to find Hu Jishu, the number 2 in his criminal enterprise. They spent a day together in Guangzhou, drinking, catching up, and chewing the fat, before making their way to the Imperial Hotel in Shenzhen on January the 16th. They stay here for several days, making plans and gathering their comrades, but a problem starts to emerge. As each day passes, Cheung spends less and less time at the planning table and more time at the window, twitching the curtains, getting increasingly paranoid that he's being watched by the police. I don't understand how he cannot be watched by the police by now. He's an extremely lavish lifestyle with apparently no legally gained money. Surely you just got to assume the police are watching. The twist here, folks, is he wasn't wrong. I don't think there's a twist. I mean, the police should be watching this guy. The police have been tailing him constantly since he left Saiwan docks. Cheung's fame was proving a double-edged sword because as soon as a dock worker saw him entering the docks with the truck, they called the police, who in turn had been sticking to him like glue ever since. Not only had they been tracking his movements, but plainclothes officers saw through high-power binoculars as he hid his cash in Ma So Long. They then tailed him right up to the border and then handed the operation over to their comrades in Guangdong. After humoring his well-founded paranoia, Cheung and his ever-swelling gang relocated to Zhuhai and stayed in an apartment in the Seaview Garden Tower block. His paranoia continued to crescendo, so he relocated again to Zhuhai Golf Club, reasoning that plainclothed officers pursuing him wouldn't be able to follow him inside as non-members without giving their identities away. Yeah, but wouldn't you just quietly go to the reception and be like, "What's up?" And just, sorry, for those listening, I'm doing the flipping out a badge motion and being like, "Shh, don't tell anyone, but I'm with the police." And then just entering and then just carrying on. This worked great for a solid 2 hours until the pursuing officer simply jumped a fence and then found his car in order to deduce which villa he was staying in. He then relocates again, but this time unknowingly is actually successful in shaking his pursuers off his scent. The trail went cold for a few days until Guangdong CCTV operators, who had been briefed to be extra vigilant, found him in the Zhuhai department store on the afternoon of January the 24th. Plainclothes officers swarmed the car park of the store, but hung back and waited for him to appear before they made their move. Hours passed, and Cheung's car still sits idly in the car park. Growing impatient, the officers decide to make their move. They called in uniformed officers who began to surround the department store and blocked both vehicle and pedestrian exits. Cheung, who had been amusing himself in a bar located inside, abandoned his car and managed to flee on foot after he rather ungracefully vaulted a wall at the rear of the building. He found himself at the Gongbei Hotel close by. How is this dude? Surely at this point you're going to be like, the police are really after me. I should now just be focused on not getting caught rather than continuing with my kidnapping crimes. He called Hu Jishu and informed him that his paranoia was not unfounded and that he could feel the net closing in on him. Jishu tried to calm the increasingly erratic Cheung, who apparently by this stage was more paranoia than man. Yeah, but rightfully so. Jishu snuck into his hotel room that night and arranged for his brother to bring a spare change of clothes for them the following morning. The pair then took a taxi from outside the hotel, reasoning that all their cars were probably tagged and being traced, and headed for Jiangmen. All seemed calm in the taxi, and Cheung started to finally relax. His heart dropped to a resting rate for the first time in days. Everything would be fine in Jiangmen, the pair reassured themselves. It was underdeveloped, more remote, and there was basically no CCTV. They planned to lay low for a few weeks, get new clothes, new cars, and everything would be just fine. That may have been correct, but they never actually got the opportunity to find out. Just outside of Jianmen at 12:10 in the afternoon, the taxi crossed Waihei Bridge just on the perimeter of the city and is pulled over what appears to be a routine traffic stop. A very mild-mannered traffic control officer asked the driver of the taxi to please leave the car and come to his cabin so they could check on her paperwork, to which she obliged. As soon as the door on the aforementioned cabin closed and the taxi driver was out of harm's way, dozens of SWAT officers burst from the bushes from behind barricades and out of drainage ditches. They screamed at Cheung and Hu Jishu to place their hands on the seats in front of them where they could be seen. Two of the officers then maneuvered around to the rear of the taxi and lined up nice clean angles of fire into the back of the criminals' heads in case there was any funny business. The pair were then dragged from the taxi, handcuffed and thrown into the back of a police van, firmly under arrest once and for all. What are they getting them for? Planning a kidnapping? Did they? Oh, all of the guns and the bombs and the weapons. I mean, that's so much stuff that's like you got to be able to go to prison forever for like importing as much explosives as was in a B-2 rocket, right? Trial. Now that Cheung was finally in custody, the police moved to dismantle his entire operation. The Hong Kong and mainland police knew everything. Cheung had been living as a criminal celebrity for quite some time now, hardly being subtle or incognito, and the police on both sides of the border had been exploiting this to gather every single piece of intelligence that they could on him, just in case he ever went back to his old ways. How about finding him about the things that he did to get all that stuff? Just because the guy who was kidnapped doesn't come forward to the police doesn't mean the police shouldn't investigate. It's in the public safety's interest to investigate. As soon as word came from the Jianmen police that he was in custody, Hong Kong police launched an enormous timed operation to secure his cache of weapons and all of his associates at the exact same time all over the city so that none of them had the opportunity to be warned and flee. Mainland forces in Shenzhen, Guangdong, Zhuhai, Macau, and Jianmen did exactly the same, snatching up all of his associates and arms off the street in one perfectly timed swoop. In total, 36 criminals, including Cheung himself, were arrested. Needless to say, Cheung was caught red-handed and was firmly up the proverbial creek without a paddle. But this did not seem to sink into him. He was the absolute picture of arrogance during his arrest. He tried to insist that his arrest was wrongful and he was going home, complained that his cell wasn't luxurious enough, and taunted the police officers, explaining to them that they would all look like absolute knobs when he walked free. If for no other reason, he was arrogant because he believed he would answer for his crimes in a Hong Kong court, not a mainland one's, the latter having the death penalty and the former not so. Because of course he fled to China, so he's arrested in China, and China, pew, pew, whereas Hong Kong, that's why I was quite surprised that Hong Kong had the death penalty, because they don't have the death penalty. That would be China. Cheung confessed to the kidnappings without hesitation when in custody, as he believed that he was in the clear for those crimes. He hoped that by showing remorse and repentance for something he couldn't actually be convicted for, he would be afforded leniency in line with the long-standing Chinese criminal justice principle of leniency to those who confess to their crimes and severity to those who refuse to cooperate. But fortunately for Cheung, his confessing for some of the crimes he was clearly guilty of destroyed all appearances of sincerity. Cheung denied paying for the explosives, but not his involvement with the cache altogether. His strategy here was quite blatant: to salvage his life, not his freedom, by reducing his role to from that of a leader, and therefore the principal offender for the trading of explosives, a capital offense, to that of a humble hired goon, guilty simply of handling explosives. Cheung was a pragmatist and a survivor, and he was confident that he would be able to continue his criminal career if he could simply avoid the death penalty and escape with his life. Ultimately, however, his luck had run out, and on the 5th of December, the following guilty verdict was returned. Quote, "Defendant Cheung Tze-keung is guilty of illegal trading of explosives and is sentenced to death. Is guilty of kidnappings and is sentenced to imprisonment for life, deprivation of political rights for life and confiscation of RMB 662 million, is guilty of smuggling of arms and ammunition and is sentenced to life, imprisonment for life, deprivation of political rights for life, and confiscation of RMB 100,000. It is the decision of this court to impose capital punishment, deprivation of political rights for life, and confiscation of 662,100,000 RMB. That's a hell of a sentence. So, of the kidnappings, which he thought he was safe for, that's what actually gets him the death penalty. Well, bummer. After this verdict was returned, two large officers immediately flanked Cheung and ushered him out of the courtroom. With no reprieve for a last meal or to relieve himself, Cheung was led straight out of the courtroom and towards the yard. No f***ing way. No. They just take him outside and f***ing shoot him after the verdict? That's so intense. The opulent marble and carved wood that lines the walls of the courtroom gradually gave way to the unpainted concrete as they descended down a long staircase. Heavy steel door opened onto a drab-looking courtyard. No f***ing way. Is that really how it works? I thought that was just like, wasn't Ceausescu killed like that? There was like some kangaroo court and they just took him out and shot him. It's like, is this how it really works? Don't commit crimes in China. God damn. A heavy steel door opened onto a drab-looking courtyard. Cheung was pushed outside and was greeted by the sight of 6 correctional officers standing at attention with Type 53 SKS rifles all secured across their chests. The 2 officers who led him from the courtyard pushed him to a thick wooden stake planted firmly in the ground, secured him upright to the post, blindfolded him, and walked away. An officer then marched adjacent to the lined-up men, came to a halt with heavy stamp, and barked orders to his men. Section attention! Make ready! Aim! Fire! A deafening chorus filled the courtyard as the 6 men unleashed their volley, and Cheung slumped to his knees, dead. The life and story of history's most prolific and successful kidnapper were over. And there's a little note here. I hope you will give me a little whinge now, dear audience. You know that fun fact you always see, only one man in a firing squad is given a real bullet? It's absolute bollocks. Wait, no. One man is... Oh, wait. My understanding was there's like a group, let's say 6 men. One of them has a blank. The rest have real bullets. So it's just that you might not have killed him. The person who's been convicted. But maybe this is completely wrong. For starters, blank rounds look very different to live bullets. They have no head. Instead, the casing extends further and roughly mimics the shape of a real bullet head, and then it's pressed together at the end. Yeah, I've seen like blanks and compared them to real ones, but I always assumed that the guys, the people doing the shooting didn't know. They were handed loaded weapons or something. Even if someone else loads your rifle, blank rounds produce no recoil. You know if you've ever fired a live round or a blank. Yeah, that's fair. Although I never thought about that. I fired both live rounds and blank rounds. And yeah, I have to say I haven't thought about the recoil, but that does make perfect sense. Morality. To some people in Hong Kong and Guangdong province, Cheung was and remained something of a folk hero, a Robin Hood type figure who stuck it to the rich and was always generous and kind to the little guy. But does he deserve this legacy? As a humble YouTube scriptwriter, these big moral questions tend to be considered above my intellectual pay grades, but if you were to force me to pick a side, I'd come down condemning Cheung wholeheartedly. As someone who grew up exceptionally poor myself, it's easy to surrender to this very sexy, but let's be frank, rose-tinted image of Cheung. The man was a violent criminal who had no issues using extreme violence and torture when it suited his ends, and that's enough to earn him my contempt. Up to his death, he remained proud of both the scale and technical accomplishment of his crimes and the, as he perceived it, lack of bloodshed. He believed the van robberies were only robbing insurance companies who had money to lose, and that kidnapping the rich didn't matter because they were hardly left without after losing the, as he perceived it, trivial amounts of money from whom he took it. What do you think, Simon? And what does the audience think in the comment? Well, use the comments audience. I think, I often when you hear about these Robin Hood characters, like in real life, it's, okay, so they basically were stealing and they gave a small amount of that money away and they always justified it with insurance companies or it's insured by the government or blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, you're always stealing money from someone. Those insurance companies are probably publicly traded and people have their pensions invested into all of that stuff, and then the stock goes down a tiny bit. And yes, while it's barely imperceptible, I'm sure, some regular person is losing at some point. And then when it's like insured by the government, well, then everyone loses because that government's money is obviously the people's money. And I think then when it's like they give the money away, it's not like, I don't know, Pablo Escobar is the one who comes to mind, of a guy who actually gave away a ton of his money and built all these like football stadiums and stuff in his own like original village and stuff. But I mean, weight of things, he was a horrible monster. And weight of things here, this guy locked a guy in a box for like a week and makes him shit and eat in this box. He's not like some Ed Gein motherfucker, but he's not a good person. And I don't think he should be a folk hero. I also don't think he should be immediately pronounced guilty and then taken out back and shot either. I think that's also insane. Dismembered appendices. I wanted to give correct and proper context for the capital punishment judgment, but couldn't find the appropriate place for it in the main body of the script. So allow me this appendix, please, dear viewers. At face value, it appears as though Cheung was executed the day his verdict was rendered. And while this is technically true, it misses some context. Okay, good. In China, after a trial conducted by an intermediate people's court concludes with a death sentence, a double appeals process must follow. The first appeal is conducted by a high people's court if the condemned appeal to it. And since 2007, another appeal is conducted automatically, even if the condemned oppose the first appeal, by the Supreme People's Court of the People's Republic of China, the SPC in Beijing, to prevent the circumstances in which the defendant is proved innocent after the death penalty and obviously irrevocable punishment has been administered. So in reality, the verdict was given after the exhaustion of this appeals process. Okay, so you go to that appeals court and you know that it's like, if they say no, that was your last shot. It's like the phone call from the governor in a movie, right? I, George, am heavily indebted to the scholarship of Professor Cam Wong and Zheng Ming for the completion of today's script. As a writer, I always endeavor to bring you the most well-researched videos possible, but often find myself diving into areas that, frankly, are significantly above my intellectual pay grade. Books such as One Country, Two Systems, Cross-Border Crime Between Hong Kong and China by Professor Wong are invaluable sources for myself as a writer who wishes to accurately report on a complicated legal matter without having to complete yet another bachelor's degree prior. I would strongly recommend this book for anyone fancying a brain-melting but fascinating insight into Hong Kong and the PRC legal systems, as well as Chinese Tycoon by Zheng Ming, with the latter sadly only being available in Chinese. I also owe thanks to the police forces of Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Zhuhai, all of whose respective data access departments were most accommodating in my requests for information, as they always are. And well, thank you, George, for going above and beyond and reading the books and accessing the data and all of this stuff. It makes for a better episode, a more researched episode, and I hope a more enjoyable episode. If you did enjoy today's episode, well, let us know in the comments below. Leave a like if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to this in its podcast form, it comes out in both. Why not leave a review? That would be most welcome. And as always, thank you for watching or listening.